But I'm going to give a welcome that I've learned in serving at ministry at Curve Lake First Nation. So I would say Anin Bojo, Dejnakas Rodney, Bob Cajun, Dunjaba. And so my name's Rodney, and I'm from Bob Cajun. I live in Bob Cajun, but I serve at the Buckhorn Pastoral Charge, Wesley and Curve Lake United Churches. And I'm the Minister for Indigenous Justice and Respectful Relationship within the East Central Ontario Regional Council. And people from Toronto to Ottawa are here tonight and maybe beyond, and we're glad you are inside and beyond the church. And so it's really exciting that we could come together and consider the fragile gift of Indigenous language, and really grateful to have DJ presenting here tonight. I have known DJ for about 15 years when he was a leader on a canoe trip that we organized. And I think, DJ, you were a teenager at that point, and you had very memorable teachings at that. Maybe you were 20, I don't know. But someone who's known you much longer is going to formally introduce you, and that's your mom, Shelley. Shelley's part of our Indigenous Justice Respectful Relationship team as well, and has done work for many years within the church around truth and reconciliation. Before we do that, we have a co-host tonight, and that's the Standing Together Against Racism group, and Aruna Alexander is from that group. And so Aruna, can you unmute yourself and bring greetings?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rodney. And yes, as Rodney stated, I work with the Justice Committee, and within the Justice Committee, I lead the core group on racism and intercultural, interfaith issues. Happy to be here this evening. Happy that Sharon is with us as well. And thank you, Rodney, for all the work that you did. Just want to say that from a racism and intercultural perspective, this is a great event that is taking place this evening because, as we know and understand, language is a very important and integral part of our racism, or anti-racism, I should say, and our cultural perspectives. And I would recommend to you our church's document, those of you who are with the United Church, Mending the World. And I think by looking at language in this way, we are gathering together and standing together to mend one of the broken pieces in our world. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Aruna. And Shelley, could you introduce us to DJ?
Sure. Well, what you missed. Yeah, so I have the honor of not only being mom to DJ, but I have the honor of introducing you to my most favorite guy in the whole world. And well, my dad comes in a pretty close second, but DJ is definitely number one. DJ and I really love the relationship we have. And when DJ's about 10, it was just, I guess, going into grade 6-ish, he came home just before summer break, and he said, "Mom, I want to know what my Anishnaabe name is." And so I said, "Geez." So that was quite a while ago, and we've had a long journey in getting into our heritage since then. But then I said to DJ, I said, I don't know the first thing about that, my guy. Let's maybe you'll have to go offer your tobacco to Merritt and see if you can find your name. So he stood in the pouring rain outside of Merritt's house with his tobacco in his hand, and Merritt says, "You want to come in?" He goes, No, I'm good. And he offered tobacco to Merritt, asking him if he'd find his name. And I said to DJ at that time, I said, "I don't even know what this means, DJ. I don't know if it means you have to walk the red path and the commitment involved with that. I don't know anything about that." But he said, "Well, I can tell you right now, I'm pretty committed to that." And that he's always been this old soul. So around that time, I believed him. I believed that he was going to be committed. And so we had a naming ceremony for that fall. It was beautiful. And I don't think Deidre's really looked back in trying to figure out who our people are through language. And he has been very committed to understanding how our people saw this land through the language. And so he knows more than I do, just because he knows the language. He got to, my mom passed this February, and he got to understand her way of thinking in the way I never was able to. It frustrates him because I don't speak it. I'm in that valley where the system really made sure we didn't speak. My generation didn't speak. And so he gets frustrated that I don't, but I'm like, we're all working hard to pick up the pieces in the ways that we can. So I've spent my whole life, my whole professional career in Indigenous education, but hopefully Deej will help me retrieve what I'm missing, because there's a lot there, and he's going to tell you about that tonight. So anyway, I have the honor of being mom to DJ, who is warden at Petroglyphs Park by day in the season, the spring to fall seasons. And during this off season, he kind of does this stuff, and he's actually teaching at the secondary school for KPR right now. And he'd rather be wardening, but anyway, can't wait to hear what you have to say, my guy.
Yep. Sorry. Wait for my cue there. Right, Mum, you watch DJ déjà na siłę kas, nogę mam Anishnaabemowen kas. Nie już kiedy mam rozba, déjà na siłę kadegi. Szkoda. Mogę się mam Anishnaabemowen kade. Nogę niște się jagswe, jinso bungis. Nogę gag mam, gon agree with one in Anishnaabemowen. So give you that little taste of Anishnaabemowen like, but in English, my name is English today. That Anishnaabe name is Mom that I carry, and means loon in Anishnaabe actually. And I'm from Curve Lake, and that's called Anishnaabemowen in Anishnaabemowen. And I'm 29 years old, and a little bit about Anishnaabemowen.
DJ.
But
sorry,
yeah,
we're gonna have to go to the
oh, yeah.
I think copy.
What's that, sorry?
We're gonna have to go to the presentation, I think.
Okay.
So the audio is unclear.
Yeah, no, I'm
if we all turn off our cameras as well, it may help boost the sound for DJ. So
You know, you're going all together, Deej.
oh, did we lose them? All right.
and it's also saying the screen sharing is disabled currently.
Sharon?
I think, yeah, I think it might be that my internet's having an issue sharing the audio and the video, but if I can do the screen share, might be good to go.
So I think Sharon will make you co-host.
You should be, try it again, DJ. You should be able to.
Oh,
now.
there we go. I got it now. Yep. Thank you. Perfect. Going. There has to be a couple of hiccups before we get anywhere. Alrighty. So, well, fortunately, the majority of what folks missed in the beginning, there's Anishnaabemowen anyway. I'll give you some more later on. I was thinking I was going to have some stuff already written out there on a Word document just to share with you some phrases and stuff, but I think I'll just do it by hand as I show it to you. Any rate, just the intro there is just introducing myself, Anishnaabemowen, and I'll just do again in English here now. But my name is DJ Fife in Anishnaabemowen, which is English, and Mong in Anishnaabemowen, which is Loon in the language. I'm 29, I'll be 30 in April, but I've been pursuing the language for quite a long time, actually. I actually went through all of school from kindergarten through to grade 12 in Ojibwe class. I think I might have skipped grade 10. But it really took off for me after school when I made it personal pursuit, and I made it a habit or a real effort to visit my grandparents who spoke the language every week. So I just made it part of my everyday life to just go and find out as much as I could, because I just wanted to solidify this part of myself. Growing up, I always was trying to figure out my identity because I am of mixed ancestry. Got some Scottish ancestry, Anishinaabe ancestry, and there's some other stuff in there too. Potentially, we don't know for sure what other histories are there. But growing up in Curve Lake has always been a very prominent feature of my life in the community there. It was kind of interesting though, because my first 4 years of life, I lived in Kitchener, and I knew that my granny and papa were Anishinaabe, but I didn't really put together that I was too. And my granny was a Anishinaabe language teacher for most of her professional career, and my grandfather, my papa Keith, was the chief in Curve Lake for a long time. So they were very prominent figures in the community that way. So I always knew they were Anishinaabe, but it never really clicked for me that I was too. So anyway, the big thing that I kind of took hold of was language. So and people are messaging, I can't see it, so you'll have to someone with audio will have to let me know. But the thing that I really hung on to was language, and it's a reflection of everybody's history. What I tell our students there is, even in English, there's language that's very specific to our personal story. Like my grandparents, we call Papa and Granny, but on my dad's side, they're Grandpa and Grandma. And then in other families, they might go by Nana or Nanny or Pappy or Pa, whatever. And so that language is specific to your family and your story. And Anishnaabemowen for me is like that. They were, despite not really fully realizing, for a while, like what it meant to be Anishinaabe, I guess, there were words that I grew up with that I didn't know were not English. And this is a great way to start the slideshow. I don't know why I did it this way, but I guess it's a kind of reflection of our culture that we're just kind of goofy. But I actually didn't know the English word for fart until I was 9 years old. And we went on a trip to the Toronto Zoo, and there was a hippo in the water. And I farted under the water there. And I ran around telling all the kids that I didn't even know, non-native kids, like, that hippo bogan. And my dad told me that, he said, they don't know what you're saying. And that was when I realized that I guess I knew another language to an extent. Like, it wasn't a lot, but it was always part of that. It's always the kind of crude stuff too, or the bothersome stuff. Skim egg was synonymous for me. I knew the word mosquito as well. We called them skim egg too. That's how you say mosquito in Anishinaabemowen. And always, like I said, the crude ones like mo. And other ones like that. So that's another thing too I'll show you is there. That's a little example of how it's written by most people today. I'll get into a little example or explanation of that, because it's a little different than maybe how we read things in English writing typically.
So DJ, just to interrupt, yep. We're just seeing a black screen at the moment.
Are you?
Yeah.
Well, that's weird.
Do you want to unshare and try again?
Oh, maybe. Oh, I wonder. Sorry, my video is not. I guess maybe the video has to be. Yeah. The video and my audio got muted at that one point when you guys lost me. And I didn't start the video again because I didn't think I'd have to. I think what the problem is there is that video has to be going for me to also share the screen. So we'll try that now. Okay, now what are you seeing?
We're still seeing the, oh, there we go. We got it.
Okay, a little delayed.
Your
Perfect.
first page
Okay.
is what we're seeing right now.
Well, anyways, yeah, it's just a couple of slides, and they're the, I don't know, they're not the piece de resistance of the slideshow anyway. Oh, let's get back. Here we go. So, just by example, this is a little bit. So also too, so this is about the story with the hippo, Bogadeo hippo, but I was just saying bogad without that I on the end. It's gimag for mosquitoes, the gimag, if you're fully enunciating it, and mo. But the one thing you'll find if you ever get to see a bit of Anishnaabemowen in today's community is that a lot of people know some words and things, but they don't necessarily use it correctly. It's kind of like broken English, right? If somebody knows a little English, they might not use the grammar quite right and all that. That was the case for me too at that age. So like we always say bogad, but that if you're talking about somebody else, it should be bogde anyway. So I started to realize like the significance of that language and my identity because I've always been trying to pin it down, as I said. And I remember seeing people on TV and seeing them being proud of their ancestry and their culture and reflecting that. So the slide here, Tuukaraska goalie in Boston there. I don't think he was the one I was thinking of when I was younger, but I just thought about how goalies like to reflect their personal, identity and stuff with some of the artwork they have on their goalie helmets. So you can see Tuukka's from Finland here. He's got the Finnish flag, and I don't play goalie, and I never played in the NHL. But if I played in the NHL and I was a goalie, I would have wanted to have some way of like showing the little kids back home that I was, proud of where I came from and knew where I came from. And you know what, Canada's still that for me to an extent, but I always wanted to think like if I could get to that kind of level, I would want to have a little Nimke flag there. If you're not familiar, Nimke is the thunderbird, and it's not just one bird; it's a species of spiritual birds. There's a whole legend around that, and it's said to be kind of the protector of the people, and it's come to symbolize the Anishinaabe because it's such a prominent figure in so many stories, and it's seen in a lot of rock art sites across Ontario. And it's not just a figure solely in Anishinaabe or Ojibwe culture. It's seen in other cultures as well, but it just has a very special place for us. That's what that symbol is, and it's used even today for political affiliations like Anishinaabe Nation. So, but I am very homestuck. So if you're not familiar with Curve Lake, this is a little satellite view of it. So this is just about a half-hour drive north of Peterborough, which is straight south of us there. And it's just that peninsula, right about that second bend. Well, actually, we've actually had some additional land there, but right around that 22 there on the road. But Anishnaabemowen, in our dialect in particular, the Mississauga dialect, used to be comprised of 5 communities: Curve Lake, Alderville, Hiawatha, Scugog, and New Credit. And there's a whole history there too. And if we have time later, maybe I'll get into that a little bit. Today, that language only really exists in this community, that specific dialect, I should say. And it's all older folks, and that number is quite small, the number of speakers. So that language, this is where it lives, and this is where I grew up, and this is my home. So it's all kind of intertwined for me there. And more specifically, or more finely, it's a connection to my family in particular. And this is looking at my grandparents' house. So just off to the right of the screen, the bottom right, is my Aunt Jill's house. And then behind that's my other Aunt Mindy's house. And then behind that is my mom's house where I live. And this path here would have been started by my papa about 60 years ago when they first moved in there. And he worked just at the public works just back behind here. And he started walking to work every day and started this little path that's been worn into the ground. And we have since continued walking that path. It's the way we all make our way over to Granny and Papa's to connect. And to me, I guess this was right around when I started putting together presentations. I was just kind of I wasn't even looking for inspiration, but it just kind of came to me here, and I was just looking at Granny Papa's and just thinking about how just it's the right place. It's home. So where I felt safe and nothing was wrong generally. And I've walked that path, and every member of my family has walked that path at some time. And so the point of this particular image is that that path is a physical manifestation of the connection in our family. And an extension of that for me is that Anishnaabemowen, that Anishinaabe language, is an extension of that connection. It's so rather than a physical, as in dirt packed in the ground there, manifestation, it's an audible or verbal manifestation of that connection. So, and another key part of the language for me is that I am enthralled with the land, kind of reflected in my line of work as a park warden. I like being outside. I like being on the land. The land here in Ontario is really special to me. I like to get out there and I just walk around and I think about the language. And I didn't make this connection when I had originally taken this picture or when I had started using this picture in presentations, but this is in Killarney Provincial Park, out between Parry Sound and up by Sudbury. So just out across the lake there is actually Manitoulin, and when you're there on that hill, Silver Peak, it's the highest point in the park there. You can just make out the edge of Manitoulin over there, and then you turn to the right, you can see the smokestack in Sudbury, about 70 kilometers away. It's a very beautiful spot. And anyway, since the time that I'd gone out there, this was about 6 years ago, I went there. I read this story in Anishnaabemowen in Ojibwe about these boys who, and also, sorry, the story was recorded about 100 years ago in Manitoulin and then written down and all that. And anyway, the story was about the Thunderbirds and these two boys who paddled across to where the mountains were. And I had always heard the stories about how the Nimkig, the Thunderers, lived in the mountains. And I was always thinking, I don't know where these mountains are supposed to be in Ontario. Because I mean, we've got, like, I've been to the Blue Mountains and stuff like that, but they're not like that high. But if you ever go to Killarney, you'll see that these are mountains, the La Cloche Mountains. And anyway, supposedly the Thunderers lived up in the top of these mountains, and those boys went up there and got in some trouble with them and all that. But it really kind of came full circle for me that, you know, I wouldn't have had that appreciation for that story if I hadn't really learned the language and thought about it that way and had that connection that, you know, this history goes back. But it's a reflection how the language, Anishnaabemowen in particular, is tied to this land specifically. So this is just closer to my home here. This is what I was doing a lot. I haven't much this last year, but I still like to just get out on the land and just walk. And I'm all over the place, and I almost think about the language. And it's often in these kinds of places where I think about things that I want to find out how to translate. I want to think about how my ancestors would have talked about this, because I was inspired to. I've always been inspired by the way that Anishinaabe traditionally would have lived on the land. Like, their office was the land. Like, that's where they were every day, and just learning the geography of things and knowing where things go and all that. I get to places and I wonder, Munch Pina Squajma ga Anishnaabemowen. I wonder when the last time someone spoke Ojibwe was here. Something I just told my students, I just started teaching at the secondary school the other day, actually. But something I was telling them was about how, I know some folks talk about where Indigenous people came from and all that. Like, they talk about coming across the Bering Strait and other places and everything else. And whatever the case may be, I wasn't there however long ago it was that Anishinaabe came to be here. Regardless, the Anishinaabe language originated here. It came from this land, in like North America anyway. So that's why I really attach to that history, because it is tied to this land for me. And this is another shot here where I climbed a tree and I was looking at the ice, and it's just a reflection of seeing these beautiful scenes, and that is the connection for me with that language, is that it ties me to that beauty. So, shot there, and it's reflected in some of the words we have as well for things in the land. Obviously, this is a waboos. If you can't make it out, it's a rabbit, and it's got its white winter coat. That word waboos, the initial portion of that wab, W-A-B, if we were to spell it out, is a reflection of the color light, of white or light. And that might have to do with the white color it has during the winter, obviously. Additionally, too. We have lots of Wawash-Skashwag. This is actually at the park at Petroglyph where I work. We got a ton of deer. That Wawash-Skash, the word is very descriptive. It actually talks about the flash of its tail, I believe. I've never seen that Skash anywhere else, the last part of its name. But the Wawa is also found in the word for mouse, which is Wawa-Ganoji. And I had a kind of cool special interpretation with my granny there the one time, and it really clicked for me. I don't even know why it came up, but she was saying that the name Wawa-Ganoji, that a mouse, is the scurry or the flashing little hole maker. So Wawa, just like Wawash-Skash for a deer, is around the kind of flash. In terms of the deer, would be the flash when its tail goes up and it takes off. And the mouse would just be how you just catch a glimpse of them. But the Wawa-Ganoji, the bagon there is around holes. So, and G ending is just a small little animal, typically, if you ever hear that ending. So it's cool to learn the language because it's, like I said, reflective of the land, and there's very descriptive elements of it. I don't really have a special description of the word here too, but we have words obviously for the trees as well. Jingwok, that's my favorite tree, white pine. And there's other names for them as well too. Jingwok is generally the white pine, but there are specific names too that can be added onto that. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm always thinking about when I'm out there on the land. So beyond that too, looking at the bigger picture, in terms of reflection in our history today, I just kind of highlighted areas that made me think of it. And you can see Killarney up there in the top left. But there are a ton of place names. These are just ones I just quickly went over. But there's, if you were to zoom in and able to mark them all up, there's a ton of place names that are taken from Anishnaabemowen or Ojibwe specifically, and otherwise from our cousin languages in the Algonquian language family. So Curve Lake, if you haven't been there, is just above Peterborough there. I kind of highlighted Shamong Lake. That unfortunately, a lot of words when they get borrowed into English often end up getting corrupted, and so they're missing some parts that it's just you can't quite figure it out. Shamong, there's a lot of speculation around what it actually is, but I'm not able to say 100% what it would be. Even otherwise, to the left of it, there's Pigeon Lake, which was named after John Pigeon, who was from Curve Lake and hunted over there at the time that settlers were naming places. And at the bottom end of it is the town of Omemee, where you know, what's his name? Why am I forgetting his name? anyway, somebody put it in the chat because I don't know why I'm blanking on it right now. I can picture his face. Omemee means pigeon in Ojibwe, and that's kind of cool to have that whole tie there for us. Aside from that, the general region where we live here is known as the Kawartha Lakes, and that name is specifically tied and more recently from Curve Lake about 100 years ago or so. And as I understand the story, there was a steamboat company either in Peterborough or Bobcaygeon also being an Anishinaabe name, and they wanted a name for the region that was, you know, kind of exotic, I guess, kind of like Muskoka to draw in tourists, because come to Peterborough County doesn't quite have the same draw as, you know, a traditional native name. So they said if someone can come up with a name, we'll give you a prize. And this old lady came up with Gowate-Wagame or Gowate-Wagma. Wagame just being water, Wagma being lake specifically. Gowate-Wagma is lakes where or like reflecting light off the lake essentially. And they said, okay, we'll run with that. We'll say it means land of happy shining waters. I don't know, maybe the lady kind of described it that way perhaps, but the trouble is they took off the Ogama or Ogama ending, which is the water element. And with that, they've got Gowate, which does have to do with light, but sometimes it can it depends on the ending, what it will end up being, but it can have to do with shadows actually being cast too. So anyway, they did that, so you could interpret it as a land of like shadows or something, but they put an RTH in there, the Kawartha, the Artha part. And there are no R's or THs in our language, so it's kind of just really corrupted. The name Hiawatha, the reserve down there, is actually an Iroquoian word, and that language is completely separate from us. It would be like comparing, like, I don't know, an African language to like Latin or something, right? They're just completely different. Aside from that, obviously there's a number of place names in Toronto that are specifically from our language family. One in particular, well, actually, before I get to it, just wanted to point out another one that's kind of interesting, just because I keep thinking about it, is how the pronunciations get messed up a little bit. So the town way up north of Wawa should probably be pronounced Wawa, actually. And likewise, Petawawa, the Canadian Forces base there, would be Bidwewe, and it's talking about the sound of the fall, like the falls in the river there. So if you spell it, or if you look at it the way it's spelled, when it was originally spelled, that's probably how people might have said it, but an English speaker reading that wouldn't say it that way. Bidwewe. PE should be maybe 2 E's, PE, anyway. But Oshawa is what I was thinking of. And well, my aunt went to school at Durham College, and I remember her saying that people were trying to, like her new roommates or somebody were trying to figure out like what her ancestry was. And they said, like, what are you? And she said, oh, I'm an Ojibwe or whatever. And thinking back on that story, I was quite young when she went there. I thought it was kind of ironic because Oshawa is taken from our language, and likely means Ojibwe. There might be some other interpretations. I always wondered if it actually had to do with Jaonong, which is in the south, but Ojibwe makes a bit more sense to me. And so that's just on the other side of the thing, I think. And I don't know if the name got applied there when they were actually talking about the other side of Lake Ontario or something, because you can sometimes just see a bit of the edge of the other side of the lake, sometimes way up high there. I don't know. It's just interesting to see that history, and that's stuff that once I started getting into the language, it really started sticking out for me. I was like, geez, there's all these place names all over the place that are from our language. Just trying to think of the other cool ones. There's a lot of really good ones up there, close to Halliburton and stuff. It's interesting to think about once you get to it. I haven't talked about our language family here, but that's the Algonquian language family. You can see it's spelled at the top there. This is just from Wikipedia. You can look it up yourself. So the same way that, well, I'll show you a diagram later, but the same way that, say, Spanish, Italian, and French are all related, they're all Latin-based, they were all originally the same language, and they spread out over time into different families. There are a number of families that are related. You can see them listed there. I think, actually, maybe you can't, but they were all once upon a time the same people, and over time and distance, they spread into their own specific dialects, which became their own languages. And at any rate, it's a very large language family, as I'll show you later. To carry on with the place name trend I was talking about, there are 3 provinces in Canada which are from this family. The names of Quebec, you would think is French. It's actually our kind of related language, Algonquin. It's pretty much Ojibwe. We would say Gabak for some, like that's the start of something that closes. Gabak Sidun would be, how you'd say shut that, like shut a door. And talking about the St. Lawrence River and how it closes. And Manitoba, which Manado is a spirit. I don't remember the ending of it. It's been shortened down, but it has to do with the Strait of the Spirit, I believe, on Manitoba Lake or Lake Winnipeg. Again, another Anishnaabemowen word. And then Saskatchewan, and that one has to do with the river. I don't remember the initial part of it, but the Chewan part, if you hear at the end of it, same with Kashechewan First Nation and any other Chewan. In Peterborough, we've got the name of Ngojwanong. That Jiwanong is the river part of it. So anyway, it's cool with place names. There's 6 states as well. Won't get into those. Anyway, another thing is there are borrowed words in English that are taken from Anishnaabemowen and our cousins. So chipmunk isn't how we say chipmunk, actually. It's how we say jidmo, which is how we say squirrel. So when Europeans came over, they saw this creature and they were like, what do you call that? And like, oh, I don't know, it's jidmo, it's just a squirrel. And that name kind of got changed a little bit, but it stuck. You can see some of the other words that are borrowed from our cousin languages. This list goes down a little farther too. I always think about the hockey announcer, holy Mackinac. That's from Mackinac, which is how we say a turtle, a snapping turtle. I didn't highlight it here, but moccasin, that's how we say shoe, Mackizin. And I didn't highlight moose either. Originally, the Europeans who first came over, and you know, they have like what they call elk over there, which are related. But the guys who came to North America initially wouldn't have seen those moose before. And the Abenaki, as they say here, I had thought it was a Mi'kmaq. They say moose. In Anishnaabemowen, when we say moose, pretty much the exact same word, moose, moose, and Cree might say mosa, I believe. And then muskellunge is borrowed. Yeah, see, it says ultimately here. It's borrowed twice. So we say majganoja. A ganoja is a pike, and the name is again descriptive. Ganoja is just a long skin, essentially. if you know what a pike looks like. The fish, that is, if you're not thinking about what I'm thinking about. And Majganoja is the kind of ugly pike, or the bad pike, because the pike's bright silver and clean looking, and the Majganoja is a bit muddier kind of camouflage color. And then beneath that too, you can see muskeg there. We say muskeg for a swamp. Oh, one I didn't highlight because I didn't really look into it at the time or didn't think about it. At the bottom there, opossum. From Powhatan, and that would have been like Pocahontas's people, just for reference as far as how far our language family goes. That is actually very similar to how we would say like a white dog, as you can see is said here. So we would say Awabanim. They've just changed a couple of sounds. So they'd say Opossum, Awabanim. And just for comparison, so the basis of dog for us is Nim. It's become Nimosh over time, which actually kind of means darn dog. But for the Cree, they say a Tim, and for the Powhatan, apparently they would have said a Sim. So they would say a Sim, we'd say a Nim, and the Cree would say a Tim. The Stott Tim is a big dog, a horse for the Cree. And skunk was a good one too. So they got that from Massachusetts. And I have a dictionary that was originally transcribed by a missionary back in 1840, I believe. And I found the entry on the Ojibwe to English portion. And I found Jagog, and I was like, oh, okay, so skunk. And I was expecting to read in the English skunk. And he said some kind of wild polecat because they didn't have a name for it at the time. So they said in Massachusetts more like skunk. We say Jagog in Anishnaabemowen and Ojibwe. It's a little different, but you can see the similarity. Jagog, skunk, toboggan, totem, dodam is Mike Land. And there's a number of these other words too. And this one, second from the bottom there, I know a lot of people talk about different ideas as far as what the Otonabee River means. I've heard a bunch of different interpretations of that, but I've always wondered about this too. I've only seen this in dictionaries from Minnesota, Tullabee. It might be Adonabee, and that would almost make sense, but I don't know. So, and then if you hear a wigwam, it should be pronounced wigwam. That's how we say a house. It's reflective of the construction. So birch bark. Well, a piece of birch bark is wigwas. So the name of the building that's made out of wigwas is a wigwam. And wabadi, which they say here they got from the Shawnee. We would just say wabdi. It just means a white butt. That's what an elk looks like. Has that little white bottom on them. So, yeah, it's just really cool to see that connection. And this is a reflection of that greater connection to my Anishinaabe relatives and cousins and fellow Nuij Anishinaabe across Anishinaabe King. So these little red dots reflect places where Anishnaabemowen and its various dialects is spoken, or has been at least. I think this map would have been about maybe 25, 30 years old now. But if you were to overlay this in Europe, for example, it would be a very large country. And all this history is kind of under the surface when you're just looking at a modern political map and you just see Canada there with, what is just a few provinces, but it's a very large area and all this history is there. And having that language allows me to really have a tangible connection to those people. There's a lot of changes, so I'll show you that a little bit about dialects at the end there. But the comparison would be if you took somebody from down here close to Toronto and you went way up north to the Manitoba border. They speak Ojibwe up there. It's really Anishinaabe. It's Ojibwe more than it is Cree, I think. But there are some very big differences that might make it a little difficult to understand. My granny said that the Anishinaabe there was a little hard to understand, but it would be like taking somebody from Paris, France, and bring them down to Cajun, Louisiana, and they'd be like, we can't understand this swamp version of French. It's just changed so much over time and distance. Even Quebec to modern French too in France. So, but real quick little view there of the Algonquian language family. So, like I said, all these people once upon a time would have been the same people way back when. They don't know what that language actually looked like for sure, but they can kind of guess. And it's just because there's similar features. Like I said, it's like comparing French and Italian and Spanish. If you heard Italian and Spanish at a distance, you might think they're almost the same language. There's some distinct differences, obviously, and the same is true with these languages, but it's just a natural phenomenon with language over time. It slowly changes and slowly becomes something else. Even generation to generation, you think of English, what are the kids saying these days? I don't know. They've got their own slang, and that's how language evolves. That's just the way it goes. But yeah, you can see. So they don't have Anishnaabe written here. They have Ojibwe, and all the other subgroups of it: Odawa, Nipissing, Algonquin, Ojibwe, Soto. I should also point out there. So you can see it says Algonquin. So that is a dialect of Ojibwe, pretty much. They consider themselves a separate language sometimes, but it's essentially a dialect of Anishnaabemowen. But anyway, it's a little confusing because there's that dialect underneath this Algonquian umbrella. So if you're ever getting confused by that, I don't know. I just kind of chalk it up to trying to take an unwritten history and bring it into this written history or written kind of organization, I guess. It doesn't always work out perfectly. And then also just want to point out that the Potawatomi, the Boudwayatamig, the people who make the fires. My mom can tell you about how when they were kids, they used to tell my papa, Boudwan, make a fire. I would say the comparison for Boudwayatamig and Anishinaabe would probably be like Portuguese to Spanish. They're really close. They've really shortened things down. They have a few different items and stuff, but at any rate. This is a map reflecting where that language family is found. So as I said, the Powhatan people, the Powhatan Confederates and all those guys, like a Pocahontas fame, would be down towards like Maryland area, Delaware and all that, I believe, if I remember correctly. Anyway, they were on the eastern seaboard, as you can see here. And the words you see written are the various languages' way of saying woman. So there's a bit of variation there. You can kind of see just down towards like New York. Their words are very similar to ours, which is Ikwe. So there's just a few different dialects here for Anishinaabe. When you say Ikwe with the I, and Isqueo in most of Cree, and that's actually where the term squaw comes from. So it literally just means woman, but it got kind of turned into a derogatory term. That actually is one example of where I like to joke that to make a Cree word out of a Anishinaabe word, you just put an S in it. So like we say Ikwe, they say Isqueo. Likewise, we say Makwa for bear, they say Musqua. We say a beaver is a mick, they say a misk. Most dialects, that is. Cree's got its own variants as well. So yeah, this is actually just on Wikipedia too, if you look for it. The Algonquian language family, I'm pretty sure this map is out there somewhere. But when you think about the distance involved here, how much land is covered by this language family and all the history there, again, under the surface of the modern political map, it's it's quite the story, and nobody knows about it. And all these people spread this language and history and similar culture out over time and distance, walking and paddling canoes, and that just really speaks to me. And again, speaks to the land itself too. There's this great website called the Algonquian Linguistic Atlas, and actually a friend of mine, Marianne Corbier from Wikwemicong, she works at Sudbury. She has a big hand with this, and she does a lot of great work for the language up there at Laurentian College or university. And anyway, you can hear recordings of people in various Algonquian communities with how they would say various things. There's a little drop down list, and a lot of the stuff you can find similarities between them if you know the language well enough. They're not always written the same way because the different languages use different systems. It would be really interesting to see a consistent system used and see how it would end up appearing. But at any rate, this one community way out there where the white box drops onto in Natuashish, which is, I believe, in Quebec, but it's right near the Labrador border, right on the coast there off Labrador. And most of the stuff they were saying, I can kind of see, like, well, I can tell it's Algonquian, like it's related to our language. But this one sentence really stuck out to me here. So you can see in the green just above the name Thomas Poker, it says, "Is he back yet?" And that's what the part where the little speaker button is. Wish I could show you my mouse. Oh, maybe it'll show, I don't know. If you can see my mouse, great. If you can't. Right there, it says Shasha Degoshinu, and I have it again at the bottom of the screen. And when I heard it, I was like, well, that isn't really too different from how we would say Ajana Degoshin, which isn't, is he back yet, but did he already arrive? So we would say Aja, where they'd say Shash. We say Na, which is the yes/no marker, and they say Ah. And we say Degoshin, and they say Degoshino. And likewise, when we pluralize Degoshin, like we're saying they're arriving, when they're arriving, it'd be Degoshinog, So we use that same ending, that O, and it kind of clicked for me like, wow, like that's a word I've heard my granny use and that she grew up knowing and was passed down to her from her parents and their parents and parents, so on and so forth, thousands of years. And these people that are saying the same thing I'm hearing in this recording are 1,700 kilometers away. And the last time we would have had a common ancestor would have been thousands of years ago, but that language has carried through similar enough that I could still pick that out and realize like, wow, like that's the same language. And if I didn't have that knowledge of the language, like this wouldn't have meant anything to me. I wouldn't have been able to make that connection. It wouldn't have clicked. And it actually reminds me of a story as well of some young lads from Saskatchewan, I think it was, or Ottawapiskat, up on Hudson's Bay or James Bay anyway. They were in the army actually, and they came down with a youth group as kind of stewards to the petroglyphs. And they spoke Cree when they were kids, and well, actually they spoke Cree even then, even at their age, whatever, 25 or 22 or whatever. So I was bugging them about languages about, I don't know, 7 years ago. And I was asking them all kinds of stuff, and they're like, "Oh, well, yeah, well, we say, this way. It's pretty close." And eventually, they're like, "So we were like related somewhere way back there, huh?" And I was like, "You have no idea, man." And it's funny because even if you grew up with the language, you might not get to appreciate it unless you take a little academic look at it and think about it in this light of our connections. This is some of the power of the language for me. But I don't know if I've got the right map for it handy. We can see here. But this kind of speaks to some of the push for me as well from more of a negative end, and that is looking at this languages of Canada, which lists and describes all the languages spoken in Canada. This works with the 2011 census, so I don't know if we've got any better information today, but at that time, of like, 36 million people in Canada, only 200,000 people spoke an Indigenous language. So that is a language that, came from this land. And just for reference, it listed all the way down. So these are all the most spoken languages. So you can even see here, there's just about as many Portuguese speakers in Canada as there are of all Indigenous languages combined. That being said, there are, a lot of young Cree kids growing up with a bit of language, but it's still not in great shape. And just to show you the number down here, Cree, which is the most spoken Indigenous language, has 77,000, almost 78,000 speakers, but there are 25 languages with more speakers than it, than the highest spoken Indigenous language. And just for example too, I had never heard of Gujarati at that time, but Gujarat is a region in India, and they have 90,000 speakers in Canada. I was like, that's interesting because I had not even heard of it. Anishnaabemowen, Ojibwe, there are 44 languages, including Cree, and Nuktitut, which is at the very top there. That's the Inuit language that have more speakers. I believe, Hebrew is there, and so it's cool that we have the diversity and have all this ability to share knowledge in various forms, because language carries nuances and history and stuff, just like I'm showing you here. But the thing is, if we ran out of Finnish speakers there, the 17,000 of them in Canada at the time, like if the kids didn't grow up learning Finnish anymore here, there's still the whole country of Finland where that language and that culture still exists and you can still get it. This, between here and the couple of US states where Anishnaabemowen was spoken, it's just here where you find that language. And once that language goes out, you're not finding it elsewhere really. And there are some Indigenous languages between Canada and the States where we're trying to revitalize it, but it's really something to think about when there's this pillar of history that's been going on as long as those people have existed, and you're present to see the extinguishment of it, perhaps. I don't know that, like, in my lifetime I'll see all of Anishnaabemowen kind of go away, if in worst case, but at this part of the province, this would be one of the most dire places. I mentioned all those other communities of the Mississauga dialect, and like I said, it's just Curve Lake where that exists, and we're the northernmost of those communities. So it's literally just a matter of geography, really, and assimilation. And these are other Indigenous languages further down to Ojibwe. There's 9,000 of them as well. So that kind of boosts the numbers a bit. They're all really isolated communities. That's why the language has really been able to hold out there. And Innu is that language that I said had the example with Shasha Dagoshin. And there's Mi'kmaq, their cousins, the Pygmeg, which they're pretty close to. They're not Cree, but they're very close to Cree. They're in Quebec, and just for interest's sake, a Pygmeg for us is a whitefish actually in Anishinaabe, and that's what their name probably means too. So yeah, but this is just a reflection of that pillar of history. So you know, like if this is representative of speakers of the language and carriers of that knowledge and that culture, those blue dots would be like the Anishinaabe, and as long as and their ancestors and cousins, and as long as Anishinaabe have been a people, that language has been spoken, and it's just here within, especially the last 100 years, but last few 100 years, that we're seeing the loss of that knowledge and that history and that language. And I'm right in the mix of those yellow and blue, but especially more so to the right there, where I am, in that position to be a connection between this pillar of history and this continued story and the potential future, or I will be in that generation to see it end. And it's just, it's really powerful. And it's always really struck me, I guess. It's been a big part of my quest for my identity is where do I go? What do I do here? What do I do with this challenge? So that's some of the interesting elements of it, and some of the delicate elements of it, I guess. The challenges, aren't just like outright assimilative efforts, that we're all familiar with residential schools and other efforts that way. There's also passive stuff too, like just thinking about in my community too, right? Like kids growing up and myself, we had lots of non-native friends, and all of our friends speak English. So like, what are we gonna just talk Anishnaabemowen at them until they speak Anishinaabe in an ideal world? But it's just trying to fit into this modern world, which is just completely overwhelming, right? It's a bit of the modern age. So there's a lot of challenges, but there's also a lot of efforts being made to preserve the language too. So it's not all negative. But just for a bit of familiarity with you guys, I want to make sure I didn't miss anything, but this is what the key part of this writing system that is most widely used in Anishnaabemowen is. So it's always the same sounds. In English, the writing we use is kind of terrible if you have never taken the time to look at it. But someone trying to learn to read English must have such an awful time. You think of the GH endings like tough, enough, so those have an F sound. But like though there's no F sound, it's not buff or whatever. Or in the word garage, the G has two different sounds. So there's garage, it's not garage or garage. And the A's, I think, too, have two different sounds too. So it's ga and so and whereas in this system, the single A is a U sound, is in like but, like The long two A's is a longer sound of that. So so as in but, and as in father. E is an or sound, like Anishinaabe. I think it's somewhere between like bet and bag. It can vary a little bit with communities, but it's generally that kind of sound. And is always the sound made with the I, and that's something to keep in mind, because some people, when they see it at the end, they think of the word ski in English, and they think it's a long E sound, but it's always I. Two I's is the long sound, so E, O, pretty straightforward. Although some people might see two O's together and think of like tune, like a teletune or whatever, or tune a guitar, but it's always more of an O sound. Like nongum is how we say today, and that's spelled with two O's at the first sound. So o. And that's one of the first things you learn as a kid in kindergarten, is this chart. And there's actually, I've seen 3 different ways people have organized this. I always thought it was just the one, because I don't think I learned it I might have learned, yeah, I learned and so then you go all the way down the chart. So you've got the vowels at the top and the consonants on the left. So you got b, d, g, j, z. And ZH is a j sound, like bonjour or measure. That's not a sound typically written that way in English, so that's one that might not appear to most people. P, t, k, pretty straightforward. I'm just trying to think if there's examples that you see that you wouldn't hear in English. But I would think the bigger ones are like the j sound, and the G as in g is always a g hard G. It's not like garage, that j, garage, that would be written with a ZH. And also it can throw people the way things are written. The one I always think about is in Curve Lake. If you didn't hear somebody, you'll say, why? The way that would be written in this system would be spelled the same way we spell the wrong way. It'd be W-A-Y. That is how you would spell that. But I don't think enough people know this system well enough to realize that. And even folks who do speak the language, they might not have grown up with this. Obviously, my papa spoke the language most of his life, but he is not familiar that much with writing it. So this wouldn't seem intuitive to him, whereas for me, I've known this since I was 5 years old, so it just makes sense. And that's typically what you find. And my granny was generally familiar with this because she taught it at school, and she learned it at university to teach Anishnaabemowen. There are some sounds in here, some clusters of vowels and consonants that don't come up too often, but this is pretty much the extent of what can appear. I'll also mention that Anishnaabemowen, kind of like a number of like Japanese or Asian languages, I believe, at least Japanese, will typically have these vowel consonant clusters like this. It always appears like that. It's not often like in English. I'm trying to think of an example where you have a number of consonants together, like slept, like how you have the PT at the end of it. If you think of any Japanese company name, like Toyota, Mitsubishi, Toshiba, it's always a syllable, like a matter of syllables matching up. So that's the primary system of writing that is used in most academic settings and most study of the language. But there are some other ones that you'll encounter too. So if you see on the left here, on the right is an example of what that writing looks like. This isn't a copy of each, it's just a comparison. Although the very first two words up there, Miadash, is the exact same that's written over here. So this is an old thing. I don't know how old this writing is. I think it was from the 30s, if not the 1800s at some point. But they've written a completely different style. And that's the reason that academics move towards this double vowel system, because it's very consistent. It's always the same, because there's all these other systems that got used previous to that. And then this is another one that's a bit closer, so that the writing on the left is from Basil Johnson, who was a very prominent Anishinaabe author. And his system, so he actually really didn't like the double vowel system. He grew up, learning typical English Roman spelling, and he created his own little system here. And it's not too bad. I don't think there's too much that I can complain about with it, to be honest with you, but it to me appears to be longer typically, the way he writes it. And there's a couple of things I think I've seen once or twice that were not quite as consistent for me. And I think just by comparison, I grew up with stuff on the right, so I don't really like stuff on the left. And he grew up with stuff on the left, so he didn't really like stuff on the right. But he's got a lot of great knowledge. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, but he has a lot of good stuff out there. The other writing system that's used for Anishnaabemowen, which kind of has a cool tie for us in the local area here, and specifically with the church actually, is syllabics. So syllabics, there's two origins of the story. The one actually is that it was brought to the Cree people by a man named Waking Badger or Waking Badger, I can't remember. I forgot how to say his name in Cree. It's not too bad, but at any rate, he had a near-death experience and had a dream about these letters and how to write down their language, and shared it with them. So there's that version of the story, and then the written version of the story is about this man named James Evans, who was a missionary, and this was back in the 1830s and 1840s. And apparently he came to Rice Lake area, actually, so Hiawatha, just south of Peterborough, and he learned how to speak and converse in Anishnaabemowen in Ojibwe. And he wanted to convert the community there, the people there, and teach them the Bible, but in their language, whereas most other missionaries were just trying to do it in English. And I think he kind of did face a bit of adversary there from within the church around, like, we'll just teach them English, don't bother with their language, and we'll kind of want them to stop all that altogether. But he really tried to persevere and do this, and so he was writing using something like the stuff on the left, or it might have been a bit of this. I think he actually put hyphens between every sound, but it ended up just not working very well, apparently. At any rate, in the 1840s or so, he moved up to Norway House in Manitoba, where they're Cree, and he learned their language. And apparently he had some knowledge of this script used in a region of India. I can't remember the specific names at this time, but in that area, every symbol represents a syllable. So it's that's why it's called the syllabic system. So you can see the chart here mixes on the left a consonant with a vowel on the right. And so as opposed to 26 letters we have in the Roman alphabet, there's pretty much, I think it's just 10 here, something like that. And depending on which way the symbol is turned, you're going to have a different vowel attached to that consonant. So it's actually really quick to learn. It only takes a couple hours to learn how to read it versus, like, I don't know how many hundreds or dozens at least hours to learn how to read Roman alphabet. So it's very consistent, very straightforward. And it was so easy that the Cree in the 1840s or so, after learning it from Norway House initially, they went and spread it on to communities beyond that region. When James Evans left Norway House to go to other communities to preach and stuff, he found that they were already using the system that he helped with. And well, and that's part of it too, actually, is that there's some communication around, even if James Evans really had a leading part in doing this, he still had to work with Indigenous people. So it's just, there's a conversation around not making the focus just around like this one guy, right? And anyway, and a non-Indigenous person in particular. But it was so easy though that the Cree back at that time had a higher literacy rate than the English and French speakers in Canada, apparently, which is quite significant and quite impressive. So this then kind of backtracked onto Anishnaabemowen as well. So in northern Ojibwe, there were some communities that used this system. I don't think it's quite as prevalent anymore, but also it got carried up to the Inuit, who I guess some of their folks came down to Moose Factory, Ontario, where they're Cree, and they saw them using the system and adapted it to their own language. And that's why most people typically associate this with Inuit, I believe, like Inuit people's language, Inuktitut, but it actually started with the Cree. So, and then just for reference, at the top there are triangles. So if there's no consonant attached to it, like Anishnaabe, the word Anishnaabe starts with an A, it would have a triangle at the start because it doesn't have a vowel or a consonant attached to it. And then if there's a consonant at the end of a word, it has one of those finals on the right. So I can explain this whole system to you in depth, but we'll leave it at that because it could take a little while. Oh, I will mention though, at the bottom you can see part of the reason there are so few letters or symbols is that B's and P's are joined together because they're both plosive consonants. They're both used kind of puffing off of your lips. G's and K's, I think it's called guttural. I can't remember, guttural or bottle. They both come from the back of your throat, g and k. And the difference between these two sounds is one is voiced, one has a bit more air breathed through it. D's and T's likewise are dentals, are kind of kicked off your tongue, or your teeth, sorry. And ch and j, ch and j are the same, and s and z are the same, and sh and j are the same. So be aware of that. Just an example of how that looks as well. So one thing that's really nice about it is it really shortens down the written language. So Anishnaabemowen, you can see there has quite a number of letters. And if you're wondering, that is the Ojibwe language as a word, as a noun. But that's how it's written in syllabics just above it, and then spaced out beneath it, Anishnaabemowen. That's an example. So it's really cool to look into if you ever wanted to check it out, but it helps to have a bit of background in the language, obviously. And then this is like a whole other.
DJ, can I just interrupt you for a second?
Yep.
So we're going to try to have some time for question and answer, and also.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I was trying to keep track of time, but.
Yeah. So if you could take 5 minutes to wrap up or less.
Sure. Yeah, I was actually right near the end anyway, I think. So, yeah, I'll just really quickly just mention the dialects here, and then I'll open up the floor. So, does that sound all right, or what do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that sounds good.
Yeah. So, just a quick map here, though, of the dialects. So, the blue area down by Toronto, that's the Mississauga Anishinaabe. That's us here. We're actually named after a great river outlet, and that's what Mississauga means. And it's the same origin as Mississippi. Mississippi means great river. So, and then the Odawa right next to us are the other very prominent group around here. Anyway, I'll leave that for now. But one thing I just want to point out for folks that may encounter this, this is one that might confuse people a lot. In Southern Ontario, especially, like from Sudbury south, you're more likely to encounter Anishinaabe without the in front of it. And that's because we have a syncopated dialect that's shortened down. So we don't say the in Anishinaabe, but it is the same word. So just be aware of that if you ever see it, not to get too confusing. Likewise, Ojibwe itself is relatively synonymous, but Anishinaabe is our own word for ourselves. Ojibwe has some different origins. We aren't quite sure 100%. And then just some comparison there of how you'll see it up north and down south. And even between communities, you'll find specific things. I've seen some funny stuff in Curve Lake that you don't see in other places, and vice versa. So, but anyway, there are a lot of resources out there if anybody wants to see some of the links. Some of these, I've found the second bottom link there doesn't work anymore, unfortunately. But if you ever want to see any of the various websites out there, there's tons of them. I can send along some of these links to folks if they want. And this is the particular page I don't think works anymore. I haven't found it again. So, and then this is all the books that are out there too. There's lots of resources. So there's lots of materials for folks, and there's a lot of language camps and things going on. So although there's some challenging elements facing the language, there's still a lot of hope and a lot of ability for us to, revitalize it and strengthen it and keep it alive. Yeah. Anyway, we'll hide this. I don't know. It might be best actually, I guess, if I leave it on this so that I'm not, or if I hide my video, perhaps. That's what I'll do.
Okay.
I'll open up the floor to questions. So, miigwech gobzindwieg. Thank you for listening.
Yeah. Well, DJ, I'm always amazed at your knowledge and just lots to think about. And I'm sure that,
Neil Young, thank you.
Really,
Sorry.
really enlightening for a lot of people. So I guess we will jump into questions. And I guess the chat function is one way to do it, or you can physically raise your hand. And I'm hoping that Shelley could maybe help me moderate this part. So you can turn your cameras back on, with the exception of DJ, because we want to hear what you have to say in response. We want to hear what you have to say in response, DJ. So,
yep.
Shelley, if you want to look at the first screen of folks, I could look at the second screen. Does that sound like a plan? And okay. So just raise your hand physically if you have a question, or you can use the chat function, or maybe it's something that really just spoke to you, was a learning for you in this talk.
On the bottom, there's also the reactions button, and you can make a hand motion with that if you want.
Or perhaps people could also chat too, perhaps.
For sure. Ruth over here has a question.
Yes, thank you very much. It was fabulous, and all kinds of insights that I hadn't even thought of. The worldview with the land and the language and everything is amazing. But for children living on reserve, going to reserve schools, are they taught in their language for the first few years at all, or any of the schools?
So around here, it's an Ojibwe class. It would be like having French class, and it's available, and it was to me, from kindergarten up. But there are some places in Anishinaabe country, like I'm thinking of Manitoulin Island and in Minnesota, where they've actually started immersion schools. And I think most of those are at least up to grade 3. There might be one up to grade 6. I don't know. My mom might actually know. I can't think the highest grade is right now, but out in Minnesota, they've got a really good immersion school, and there's one as well in Michigan and Manitoulin. So there's places like that, but most of the time it's just a separate, like it's just a class, like a course, rather than the whole school experience, I guess. So, yeah.
So it has been a challenge having enough language teachers actually to teach the language. And like DJ was saying, it is still taught like as a second language in many schools. And there's been community buy-in issues and all kinds of issues to go full-blown immersion. But there have been a couple of successful schools, but it really is just a small handful. And similarly as French immersion itself even doesn't even produce French speakers most often, we still haven't got to where there are immersion programs producing full speakers. So, but there's a pocket like DJ, a pocket of young people who are persevering. They are really doing whatever it takes to learn the language, and it's quite a beautiful thing. Actually, there's even a bunch of characteristics that are just happens that this group of people are emerging, and so it's quite exciting in that regard.
Right. I know there's many families of people of immigrants who the grandparents or the great grandparents spoke the language, but it's not passed on to the children, or it's not used in the home, or when they came to Canada, it wasn't a priority for them retaining the language of their ancestors, right? Or continuing to use the language. So, and I've met many people who have told me, or I know that their grandparents spoke a language they do not know. And they knew their grandparents, but yet they didn't, it wasn't a priority somehow. It was not something, and it's so, I mean, I wish I had another language that could have been passed to me as part of the cultural from my grandparents that I knew and spent time with. But it's such a valuable part of your culture and ancestry.
There's a difference.
The difference though is that, Meg, you can easily go back to where that language is spoken today.
That's true.
But here,
yes,
where the people have been here forever,
yeah,
that language, it's a struggle to keep that language alive. So there is a difference.
So there is a big difference.
Yeah.
So I actually, I worked for a few years as an occasional teacher in Toronto, and I worked next to the First Nations school in Toronto for a year. I worked at the Dundas Street school, and there was a First Nations school. I did not know Toronto had a First Nations school, and I really didn't learn much about it because I had to do my own class and in that part of the school. Does anyone know, is that a place where there is an opportunity to learn language, where people who are in the area, of course, could register their children for languages, First Nation language study? Anyone know?
It is a Toronto District School Board school, the First Nation school, and they do have some language there, but again, it's not an immersion program, and it is spoken as a second language. It was taught as a second language still. So again, you have the challenges of speakers who are teachers.
Oh, we need more people like DJ.
Mm.
Yeah. So actually, to continue on that thought too of the lack of, not necessarily lack of priority, but something I do mention sometimes in talks like this is around one of the other ways that the language can kind of get lost. It's just that I guess, I don't know if it's just being like younger folks not having or finding the prestige in their traditional language, I guess. But folks don't necessarily recognize that at the time. So like my mom's parents, you know, wouldn't have been thinking when they're raising their kids, like, oh, we have to really make sure to teach them this specifically. Like that wasn't a priority that way. It wasn't prestige. I've heard or read somewhere that in the U.S., if it wasn't for a continual immigration of Spanish-speaking people in the U.S., Spanish would cease to be spoken in 2 generations because it doesn't have prestige for most people. What's going to get you jobs and what's going to get you further in the world is English, the maiden language, right? So,
But in our case, it was a mandate. It was a mandate to ensure that the language was lost. So it was literally scared into the parents to not teach their kids because of how the parents were treated in school for speaking the language. So my parents distinctly told me, you know, when I asked, why aren't you teaching me how to speak like you? And they said, because we don't want you treated the way we were treated in school for speaking the language. So there's a mandate here to make sure the language was on its way out.
yeah.
I think I saw Helmut had a question.
Yeah.
Janet?
Yeah, Janet. Yeah, when you were showing all the different ways of writing the language, I was thinking about all the great Indigenous authors that we have that are writing in English. And I wondered if there's anybody writing in the native languages, or if any of those great books, award-winning books, are being translated into Indigenous languages and printed. But, you know, I sort of figure, would it be even appropriate, and of course it probably wouldn't be economically viable because there wouldn't be enough shoppers.
Yeah, actually there are some. So actually there's some that are, you know, fully Anishnaabemowen. Those are very rare. And I believe there are a couple of books that are translated. I have this one book that was actually a book of poems by a Anishinaabe poet from way up north in Lac Seul. And it was translated, or short stories or poems either way. And it was translated by another member of the community up there, Patricia Ningowans. And there's another book too that is more recent, and so I think the way that they can kind of bridge the gap as far as, you know, making it available to the wider audience, it is mostly in English, but there are some Anishinaabe segments, and they're actually quite interesting. The one in particular that I'm speaking about is Sounding Thunder, and it's about Francis Pegamagabo, the World War I sniper from Perry Island, from Wasauksing First Nation, and it's really cool. It's a really good little book. His I don't know if it's his great nephew or his great grandson wrote it, but it's a really cool book. So yeah, so there are some out there.
Yeah, and actually,
Great.
these are a bunch. This is a set of Robert Munn books that have been translated. So there's more. The whole set. That so we do have quite a few children's books actually.
A comment in the chat that talked about, you know, the role of residential schools. So when I think about that, I served the Heiltsuk First Nation. Yeah, Shelley's just saying, played a huge part. So I had, you know, members of my church say, you know, when we were speaking Cots language at residential school, we had pins put through our tongue. So the church, we look at truth and reconciliation. This is almost, I think, a step beyond that knowledge. Like we're aware of that, and I think one of the questions that I ask as an ally is what can I do to, you know, to make space, or to try to help in that big challenge of reclaiming the language. And it's just amazing, you know, DJ, what he's doing. And we're hoping next month to have, and maybe this is a time, Sharon, could you screen share that poster of our second part of the series? And Ann Taylor is another member at Curve Lake, and tasked with supporting language revitalization. So you're the first to see this poster. Thanks, Helmut, for making it. And it's going to be March the 2nd, again, similar format. And DJ, can you see? I wonder if you could read that for us.
Oh, sure, yeah. So Mong Kwan Anishnaabemowen. And so she says, my name is Lynn Feather, that is my spirit name, and Taylor Anishnaabemowen. And Taylor's my, so she's kind of going back and forth. And Taylor's my English name, Nagig Ganin Dodem, of the Otter clan, and Shkigmong Ganin Donjaba. I am also from Curve Lake. I'm Chisagi Anishnaabemowen. I'm a Mississauga woman, sorry. And I was raised by my mom and granny and my papa. So she doesn't have any more Anishnaabemowen here, obviously. My granny taught me to be proud of my heritage and taught me how important Anishnaabemowen is. And my papa taught me about connecting with the land and the water and all those who dwell there. Yeah, and actually, I just wanted to make a quick note too. It's another case of language being specific to family or community. I think papa is a very Curve Lake way of calling out grandfather. Actually, you'll find that quite a bit. So, but
yeah. So anyway, DJ's shared kind of his relationship with the language, and Anne will be, sharing her relationship with the language, and then we hope that we'll be able to visit Haudenosaunee communities, so that Iroquoian language group, Mohawk language at Tyendinaga, and possibly even check out a language nest in Kingston. So we're hoping to do one a month of these sessions, and that I think we're just off to a great start tonight. And again, a lot of people have expressed their thanks to DJ. Aruna, I don't know if you'd like to share some words at this time. Oh, you're still muted there, Aruna. You'll have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay, done. Thank you. Yeah, for me, this was an introduction. And so what I found really interesting was a sense of the anatomy of the language and some of the structure in terms of lived experience, and connecting that to the reconciliation vision. I think it's really important for us as Canadian citizens to try to learn at least some of the greeting phrases with the First Nations people in our communities, and so that we can have just sort of begin with general greeting conversation and that kind of thing, a few words, a few phrases, a few sentences. And so that's a different reality from the Indigenous communities themselves, keeping their language alive. But the other side of the coin is that for us as Canadian citizens to keep the language of the First Nations alive as well. And so just an easy way of beginning is to just learn some, phrases, sentences, words of greeting, that sort of thing. So that's what I would have to say. And thank you very much, DJ.
Miigwech, thanks for the opportunity too. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else here? Yeah, but I'm always pushing time. There's other things I could definitely get to. I can just talk and talk and talk. That's what I do. But I'm glad I was able to share what I could with everybody. And I was just thinking about Rodney's question too, about thinking about what we can do as allies to help language and all that. And I think what I try to do with talks like these is just to crack the little bit on some of the history that is within the language, and some of the knowledge that's there to really show people why it's important and why it's a valuable thing to keep around the language. And so I don't know the specifics about what to tell you, go do this and that's how it'll support the language, but it'll make you more open to those opportunities. And if you see something that you're like, well, this could help out people with language, or maybe if you see a historical place or you see a place name, maybe you can look into it and you can teach other people, your children or someone about that history, and say, this is probably an Anishnaabe word. A great example too is just around the corner here. We've got a road named, it's Kakabika is how it's spelled, and there's also Kakabika Provincial Parkway up north. It should be pronounced Gagavaka, but it doesn't mean waterfalls, but it's kind of about stepped falls. I asked my granny once about that. But it's a little example like that. You see signs on the road and stuff. It's there. The history is there. You just got to keep your eye out for it. So, yeah. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
So I know Ann Taylor, part of her feeling, and I've heard her articulate it, is, her effort is really around supporting Indigenous people in learning language. Now, having said that, she said, I'm always glad to talk to audiences about the language. Like you, DJ, she's passionate about the language. But there was a question that came up for non-Indigenous people to learn the language, and those phrases, words like miigwech, and pretty soon we're going to be saying gawabman, goodbye. Is there a place that you could turn us to, DJ? Maybe online resources, or I know some people actually who registered tonight are involved in classes in their communities. There are opportunities like that, but online that any of us could learn some basic Ojibwe words.
Yeah, well, so like I said, I was gonna do a little one typed up there, but if you're not familiar, Anin is one of the key words to know. It literally means how. It's very informal. It's short for how are you doing, but that's how everybody greets each other generally if you know someone. You might also hear bonjour, however, and I can type these out if folks want to see them in the chat there, but Anin is also used in a number of questions as well, so that's why it's a little different. I don't know if that's where the stereotype of the native guy going how comes from, but that's the typical greeting is Anin, and bonjour is the formal greeting, and that's shortened down from Wana Bonjour, the trickster. And there's a whole story there as to why you greet people as bonjour. And then typically the typical greeting is your name. So for example, I would say DJ, you just replace DJ with your name. Indigenous, oops, and DJ Indigenous, and that's I'm called DJ effectively. And then likewise, Curve Lake, Donjaba. I'm from Curve Lake. That's actually like the very basic greeting that like any language learner is taught typically is Anin, DJ Indigenous, Curve Lake, Donjaba. And then if you have a clan, Dodam is so like Migaze was Eagle, Migazin, Dodam, Eagle is my clan. This is another thing too, is as far as grammar goes, the order typically you see is like that. You'll say Curve Lake and Donjaba, like Curve Lake I am from, but it's not as written in stone as it is in English. So you could say Donjaba, Curve Lake if you're not going to be frowned upon or anything like that. So trying to think if there's other. Oh, and then as we have kind of alluded to there as well, Guabman is see ya. And it literally means that. So I don't like I said, I can just keep talking and talking. The thing about Anishnaabe culture and a lot of Indigenous cultures is that it wasn't necessarily as formalized or as formal as many European languages. So there are no formalities like please or you're welcome. The closest thing to please is dagana, and that just means come on. Like hand me that, come on. And I think actually I've read of a bit of disconnect there with early Europeans and Indigenous peoples. They're like, why are these people so rude? Like they just like give me that and take this and this and that, and these people were kind of like, why are they so pleading? They're always like, please. They're trying to barter their words and things, and it's just the culture. The language is very tied to the culture, right? So there's gonna be some differences because a lot of people I find when they're looking to learn the language, they ask for those formalities. They're like, how do I say please and thank you and you're welcome? And miigwech is how we say thank you today. I have some theories that it might be a newer word, but I don't know that. I wasn't there to see it happen when it came to be. But miigwech is about as close to formalities as we see. Thank you, miigwech. So, Oh, sorry. What the heck is going on here? What is going on? Oh, Rodney, you're muted, I think.
Yeah, he's.
I sure am. I sure am. Is that why you had your hand up, Aruna?
Yeah,
Okay.
no, well, no. I just thought it was wonderful because there's a very young lady sitting with Jessica, and it would be lovely to know her name and just to acknowledge her presence with us. It's wonderful to have her here.
Thank you. And Miigwech, this is Jillian. And Jillian's in grade 8. We live in Ottawa. And we are very glad to be here tonight and learn the very basics of all this. This is so interesting. So Miigwech, thank you, DJ, for your knowledge and your wonderful stories and all of that kind of stuff. It's just been a joy to listen to. So thank you, Miigwech.
And is Julia learning language?
No.
Well, learning French, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Learning French, but that was one of the things we were kind of wondering about is learning greetings and things like that. So DJ, if you were able to send some information out that we could learn, and I'm a minister of children, youth and families at Trinity United in Ottawa, and I have a youth group that was going to come to Curve Lake last June, but of course we weren't able to do that. So we're hoping to kind of rebook that trip, and it would be great to have some more of the knowledge and the language that we could use while we're there.
Sure. Yeah. A lot of this stuff is the very least you'll need to get by. The so-and-so, Indigenous, Ottawa, and Donjaba. And you don't have to give a clan, obviously, or calling to get Kanzi and Dodem. I don't know what my clan is. But yeah, I can whip up some stuff and send it along, and we can kind of disperse that out. There's also, I can probably link a few web pages as well where you can find all sorts of stuff like that, which is great. And for your daughter there, I will mention that actually one of the students I have in my class took French and is quite proficient in French before she wanted to try out Ojibwe too. So one thing for that is, as I understand it, once you've learned a second language, learning other languages is easier because you kind of have a system figured out. One thing is it's not a European language, so there's going to be some drastic differences, I guess, but at least you have some experience working through that mess of knowing two languages. So that's always good to learn something, right? Yeah.
That's really so we're on Algonquin territory. So is it quite a similar type of greeting?
Yeah. So actually, with them, so like I was saying, I would consider them to be a dialect of Anishnaabemowen. But one thing you'll find with them is instead of saying anin or bonjour as a greeting, they'll say kwe kwe. I think they might even say that for goodbye. I don't know how. I think that's how they pronounce it, kwe kwe. But most of the other stuff there you will see is said the same way. They might spell it a little differently. Like I said, different places they write things a little differently. But I've seen a lot of their language and I can understand it generally. So yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thanks.
Okay, well, I think we better wrap it up here now. We're 7 minutes past our. I'm glad you're so eager.
You have her hand up first, Rodney. Meg.
Oh, I just wanted to mention, when I was in Toronto, I was very fortunate to be able to go to the Anishnaabe Center. And I took courses that were available to me, and I took workshops and learned a great deal, not nearly as much as I need to know, about the residential schools, about treaties and all of this. And the language, there was some effort to introduce language to us, but whatever I learned, I forgot because I didn't use it. And I wasn't able to go, like we were saying, go to a class or somewhere more formally where I could learn more of the language and have it stick, or have a resource where I'm using it though with someone, because it's hard to learn a language without speaking it and all of that. So, I mean, I'd be interested in taking a class if there was one in the vicinity, but or online.
Well, we will certainly share some resources with folks. Ojibwe.net, Shelley pointed out, and thanks. So just thanks again, miigwech, everybody, and go on, men. We'll hope to see you in a month's time.